and thank you for joining us on our first ever episode of Statesman Standouts. I'm your host, Paul Bontrager, and I'm joined today by someone very special. I would like to introduce you to Craig Robinson. Craig was the adapter and director of Indiana State University Theater's most recent adaptation of Hamlet. Now, we will get to that very soon, but first I would like to introduce you and tell you a little bit more about Craig. Craig is a senior here at Indiana State University. He is an English teaching major with a minor in theater acting. Craig, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
First off, I want to talk to you a little bit about your interest in Shakespeare. Now, as I've known you, you've kind of seemed to be the Shakespeare guy. Is that a correct interpretation of you?
I wouldn't necessarily call myself the Shakespeare guy, but I do have a deep, fond relationship with Shakespeare's works. I started with Shakespeare and acting at the same time. When I was 12, my mom took me to a summer camp that had a Shakespeare troupe, and I did a meager production of Macbeth, and I played Duncan, King of Scotland, and I fell in love with the text, with the poetry, with the art of acting. And so I went back every year after that, and it's turned into an 11-year career with the Bard's work and getting to perform Shakespeare and now getting to adapt and direct it.
Awesome. Now, what made you decide to choose Hamlet?
So I chose Hamlet for several reasons. The first being that it's one of my favorites. I've always really enjoyed Hamlet. I like the story. I like what's happening within the text and the major themes of it. It was also one of my favorite productions that I ever got to do. And then I had the idea to pitch a show, and I was bouncing back and forth between different ideas, and I thought it would be an interesting challenge to try to adapt a Shakespeare script. So I went to my guns. I said, you know what? I know Hamlet the best. Let me try and do Hamlet. And I started there. In October of last year, I lost someone that was very close to me. And it was around the same time that I was adapting. Ironically, I had finished adapting Act 1, and then that happened, and I came back to do Act 2. If you were to read the script, you would be able to tell the differences, and for those that ended up seeing it, I feel like it's a little apparent that I was going through something for Act 2, but it really took the shape that it took for the final performance in that time frame, and it just made me feel more determined to do it, and also served as a really great source of personal therapy to dive into that text and start to experiment with it.
Awesome. Okay. So what led you to kind of that rock and roll, rock opera style vibe?
So it comes in several different places, but the primary idea around it was this expression of feeling. Hamlet has a lot of, in the language, in the text, there's a lot of language, or there is a lot of feelings-centered language within it. There's a lot of, the word grief shows up so frequently in it. Hamlet has an opening monologue that's just completely about his personal feelings around his father's death. Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into dew. He is expressing his feelings, as do a lot of the characters do. And that was a really big primary focus I wanted to take. And I have felt like, and this is something we learn about in acting, we are trained in modern society to kind of stifle our initial reactions based off of what we feel. Like, if someone cuts you off on the freeway, you want to scream, rant, and blow their tires out, but you can't do that. Obviously, that's not acceptable. What the art of acting and what I think I really wanted to hone in on was throwing away any fear of judgment over your big feelings and not being afraid to just express them. And that's exactly what rock music as a genre does. It doesn't care if it's too loud. It doesn't care if you're uncomfortable. It's going to be what it is and explain to you what the songs are feeling, what the artists who are portraying these emotions are feeling. And it is free of judgment. Rock music doesn't care. And it just worked really well for what I wanted to focus on.
Okay, awesome. And as someone who's read Hamlet, I noticed a number of differences, some of them small, some of them much larger, obviously, to fit into the adaptation. But overall, how long would you say that it took you to adapt?
To get to the final product, it actually took me about a year. Between getting this idea and just wondering what I could do with it, to workshopping the text and having other people put eyes on it and read it and give me some feedback. overall, and even into some of the rehearsals, like once we started, there were some errors that I had made in the text that I was like, oh, we should change this. It truly took about a year for the adaptation to take its shape.
So would you say that since you were the person that adapted it and you were the person that directed it, do you think that was easier for you than saying if someone else adapted it to a rock opera or rock and roll style of Hamlet and then you had to direct it?
Would say so. I think in that year's time, I had grown this deep relationship with this text and with this story, and especially the characters in it. One of the big changes that I really focused on was giving Ophelia's storyline some more nuance, giving her storyline more time on stage, because Hamlet to me as a character has always been asking these big questions, right? His famous monologue begins with a question, to be or not to be. But it's Ophelia that finds the answers. And in Shakespeare's time, the female characters were often done disservice. Well, we're not in those times anymore, and he's long gone. We can do whatever we want with his text. And so it was really important for me to expand her storyline, and it developed this fondness with her character. And that's the same thing with all the not eight, I think it was 13 other characters in this script. This relationship that I had dealt with them and developing. And then I think it just made it easier for me to direct it. That's not to say someone else couldn't have, but it made more sense. I felt like I knew this text better than I could just hand the text to someone else and say, okay, this is what's in my head.
And actually, you brought up Ophelia, and that was great. I've seen a few other renditions of the play and such, and I would agree with you. I think that is the most powerful version of Ophelia I've seen, and I think Aisha, the actor who played Ophelia, did fantastic,
Aisha was
phenomenal.
phenomenal.
Yeah. I did want to talk to you a little bit about that though, because if you read the original script of Hamlet, or if you go watch any other rendition of the play, Ophelia's death is almost always off stage. So can you walk me through a little bit more why you chose to have her death on stage and how that maybe changed the meaning, and also personally why you chose to do that?
Yeah. A big piece of what it came down to was trying to fight a lot of the stereotypes from the text's original time period. Oftentimes with classical works, and especially in Shakespeare's works, the women characters are done a great disservice. In that time period, any emotion that was unexplainable or had not been delved into with the nuance was deemed as madness, and that madness was treated as the other. And Ophelia's character was no exception. Her death happens off stage. She's deemed as insane by a lot of the people she's around, and she's just kind of written off. But that's never been how I've felt about her character. I have always felt like there's reasons behind this. There's things that have led up to what she went through. And Ophelia's grief is one of the biggest parts of this script. The show begins with Hamlet grieving his father, but in Hamlet trying to find that closure, and Hamlet trying to get his revenge with Claudius, he ends up giving Ophelia the same grief he experienced by killing Polonius. And it felt like a disservice to just leave her in the background like that. I wanted to put her death on stage, not for any shock value, not for any like whoa moment from the audience, but simply because it deserved the nuance that it needed. And I decided, having the ghost of Hamlet's father come in and kind of serve as a personification of her suicidal thoughts based off of the course of events that has happened with her. And then they ended up doing a tango to Tango in the Night, and he led her to the bathtub where she would inevitably kill herself. And it was really interesting too, because I decided with that to split To Be or Not to Be between the both of them. Hamlet begins To Be or Not to Be in its original scene, in a different place than it is originally, but in that same scene. But I cut it off for him. I gave the rest of it to her. And I just felt like her story deserved a lot more than what it would have gotten if we stuck with the original.
Okay. All right. Awesome. So if I may, it almost seems like, to you at least, your rendition of Hamlet very much became a Hamlet and Ophelia. Like both of their stories deserve to be told. Which,
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. What was your favorite part of the rehearsal process?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. I think my favorite part of the rehearsal process, ironically, was tech, which usually as an actor, like from an actor standpoint, tech is like long and arduous and time consuming and exhausting sometimes. But being on the other side of the table and getting to bear witness to what the creative team was able to do and have these open lines of communication over how I saw these scenes in my head, and then being able to use vocabulary to explain that to the lighting designer and the sound designer and the costume designer and watch that take shape was one of the most rewarding parts of this. And it led to a lot of great, deep conversations about these themes and about this text and about these characters. And it that would probably have to be one of my favorites. There's a whole host of others I could go into, but that's the one that's on my mind.
Okay. And then on the inverse, what would you say were some of the biggest challenges throughout the process?
Definitely time management. Being a student and being a director don't always necessarily like to meet up between my student schedule with classes and homework and tests and exams and all of that stuff, matched with weekly production meetings and communicating with the designers and having rehearsal for 3 hours a night and all of that. That was one of the harder things that I dealt with. But it was also one of the most rewarding because it taught me a lot about how I can manage my own time, for better or worse in that moment. But now I know moving forward, if I'm ever packed like that, I know what I have to do to get everything done in a timely manner.
All right. And then finally, what would you say to anyone considering theater?
100% do it. Even if you have just the slightest feeling that you might be interested, there's nothing that's going to hurt you if you try. Theater is one of the most rewarding experiences that I've ever gotten to know. And from an actor's perspective, you get to speak words that aren't your own and for a moment delve into someone else's story and give it the service and the honor that it deserves. And you get to say things that are sometimes completely true, even if they're completely made up, that just feel true to how you've experienced life from a different person's perspective. And that's such a fun and interesting, but also kind of therapeutic way. And there's so many transferable skills. Oh my gosh, I have learned so much about organization, time management as a future teacher, classroom management, and just communicating in general. I've learned more about that from theater than anywhere else because all of that is stuff that happens in the theater, and those are skills that you can take elsewhere, even if you don't pursue a career in the theater industry.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Craig. And thank you, all of you, for joining me today. And please catch us next time in the Statesman Standout. Thank you.